All right, welcome everybody to this episode 47 of the Navigating Now virtual roundtable series brought to you by Thoughtteam. I am Anthony Ewing, a partner here at Thoughtteam. Each week we bring you leaders and topics that matter most in business and leadership. And we want to welcome everybody who is joining us via different platforms. So each week at Thursday, 3 o'clock, we go live. We want to welcome those folks who have joined via Zoom. Those folks have the ability to interact with us throughout. You can share your questions in chat. We also want to welcome particularly our LinkedIn community. We have quite a great community on LinkedIn who join us each week or are maybe tuning in after the show. So those folks on LinkedIn, you feel free to say hello in the comments, drop a question in the comments as well. We also broadcast to YouTube and Facebook, so we want to welcome our YouTube and Facebook community. As I mentioned, Navigating Now is a platform that really brings voice to leaders of today, those leaders who are in front of quite a bit of change that we are all facing in the business world. And today we have another incredible guest and panelist here on the roundtable, Valentina Park, who is a VP of Media and Platforms for the Wall Street Journal. Valentina joins us with some incredible experience and insights navigating the last several years in building and scaling teams, as well as driving culture and diversity within her organization. And so we have a lot to unpack today. There are several topics that are really at the forefront of a lot of our discussions as we welcome people into this new world that we are in, whether that's hybrid or virtual, or some folks coming back to the office. And so we're going to really focus in on that change and how we can lead through that change today. Valentina, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So we're 47 weeks in, and I keep saying this, every week this dialogue evolves. And over the course of the last few weeks, we've had a more recent focus on really culture and how culture is maybe shifting or changing within organizations. And at minimum, how organizations are putting more of a spotlight on culture as the marketplace shifts before us. So Valentina, today we're really going to unpack a couple of things. And all three of these things that we're going to unpack, I want to do it through critical shifts. So shifts that we've seen in values and how values show up in culture. Shifts that we've seen in building and leading teams as leaders. What are some of those big shifts that we've seen in managing and supporting our people? And then also shifts that we will all be experiencing as we all start to imagine and understand what this new workplace will look like for us, both individually and within our team. So a lot to unpack. But I'd love to start with a very specific question. We're going to have a keen focus today on values. It's a hot topic today in business leadership. And Valentina, I'm excited to learn a little bit more from you. And so let's dive in. What do values and the meaning of values and values work mean to you and your team today? And how is that maybe a little bit different than the way that you've worked with values, let's say 14 months ago?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think in terms of values changing, I actually don't think that they should, but maybe the way in which we prioritize what we focus on within those values are what has shifted over time. What we've done with our team is essentially work through, what are our team values? What do we care about? And it wasn't enough to just name it. We needed to define each of those. So my team, we focused on humility, curiosity as being some of those values, and then there are underlying definitions of what we consider standards within those values. So curiosity, for example, is making sure that, a good idea doesn't have to be linear. It can come from anywhere. And we are always looking to learn. And I think it's a mindset. It's a mentality that you approach in the work that you do, in the types of people that you hire, in the projects that you take on, and that we're always asking questions and pushing for more. And that kind of drives some of the culture that we have, because without those values, we don't really have a culture that we can fall back on. I think in terms of what has changed over the past, you said 47 weeks. Has it really been 47 weeks?
Well, it's been more than that. Maybe 12 to 14 months. Prior to the pandemic.
So in the past year and a half, I think what has changed is we have more of a focus on the personal. The lines are blurred now. We all work from our homes because we had no choice. And I think because over the past year and a half, we've dealt with so much as a country, as a world, in individual cities. So I'm based out in New York, and New York got hit pretty hard in the beginning of the pandemic. And that meant that, the norms of, things that are happening, things that we expect in daily life, that was shifting. And that was directly impacting how you navigated the work environment. So the focus as a manager, as a people manager for my team, it was less around, can you get the work done? And what are we doing to achieve those goals? And more around like, where's your mindset at? What's your well-being? What does that look like? How are things going on at home? Can we think about mental health a little bit more vocally and on the table as part of a work team discussion, rather than assuming, that you're fine? Because realistically speaking, we were all not to some degree.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is really resonating, and we're going to dig deeper into this, but you said earlier that you cannot build culture without values. And, if anything's shifted, in our world over the course of the last 12 to 14 months is values has, the importance of values hasn't changed, but the fact that it has been brought clearly to the forefront, almost like you just can't ignore, you can't build culture without values. That's something that is different. And I'd say the second thing that I heard you say, which really resonates with us and as well as our clients, is that we're doing more and more work in the individual value space. Even with a newly formed team or organization, we're almost starting with individual values. And I want to dive deeper into that, but I want to pause here and just invite you in. So Valentina, I know a lot of folks that are watching are so curious about the leaders that are at the forefront of these topics and discussions. We are so honored to have somebody like yourself coming from such a renowned organization in a leadership role at the table with us today. So I'd love to just take a minute and have you take us through who you are, Valentina, a little bit of your career journey and the work that you do for Wall Street Journal.
Sure. So I would say my path to get here was certainly not linear. I jumped around quite a bit between industries. I think when I graduated college, I had a general view of I want to be in marketing in some sort of capacity. I don't know how. So I went from working at an advertising award show to a tech startup to now at the Journal. What I focus on here is I lead an in-house team of media buyers and planners. And we also work with the major tech companies to figure out how do we build a stronger relationship so that news media and tech are constantly talking, just because it is part of day-to-day culture. It is very, very important just in everyday life.
You said something that really resonated, the non-linear career path. We actually focused on that last week on our show. And we've talked to a handful of leaders who maybe have taken atypical pathways throughout their career. Do you think that your non-linear career path to where you're at today allows you to navigate through change and ambiguity better than if you had taken a more traditional path?
Yeah, because I think at every step of the way, you are reconsidering where you're at and what you're interested in and where you want to move towards. None of this was planned. I think it did make it more challenging when I went from a tech startup back into marketing. A lot of the questions that I got were, well, this is a very different world than you're used to navigating. Are you sure this is the right fit for you? So being able to articulate for yourself what you want, and then being able to articulate that for others, that essentially forces you to, okay, in different situations, can I think of this in a slightly different perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we bring people into our organization with very diverse backgrounds, we also realize that perspective from even outside of your industry or outside of your craft is extremely valuable today, especially as we have more of a focus on the individual. As a leader now, you need to have that perspective. And oftentimes within industries, we work with a very kind of homogenous population, a very, particular profile, if you will. For example, my past career really started at 10 years in a single industry, working with a very particular sales and commercially oriented business profile. And over the course of the last, call it 6 years, I've had the opportunity to really elevate work across different industries, both in startup and more established organizations. And just having that perspective, I think, allows me to be more empathetic and more in tune with individuals, whether they're client individuals, customer individuals, or teammates as well too. It's almost like having the liberal arts kind of background in today's world might be a little bit more valuable than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, I took a look at your own background, and when I came into it, I was like, I don't really understand, the path that he took. And then I remembered that my own doesn't make sense. And I think that might have been a shift over the past 5 years, where people weren't just looking like, okay, you have experience in this industry, you've done this work before. Obviously, there are certain skill sets at certain levels that you expect, but being able to pull from outside in, I think, is a really, really important part to trying to think outside of what you know and what you're comfortable with. And that's the only way that you can push boundaries. So if you're surrounded by the people who think the same way as you do, look the same way as you do, have similar experiences, lived experiences, you're just going to get more of the same. And being able to pull from outside of that comfort zone I think it's really, really important now. You can't afford to just stick within what you know.
Yep. And you raise a really good point in terms of how we navigate our career paths. But I also think it really reigns true in terms of how we recruit now into our organizations. If there ever were one or two very positive byproducts of the shift that we've been through, and I'll speak more specifically to Thoughtteam, the organization, it's in the last 12 months, we have really opened our parameters to the types of people that we bring in. And that goes down as specifically to geographically, right? So for example, you and I are connected through a good friend of yours and a Thoughtteam teammate here, Emily Da Silva. We're so thrilled and excited to have her a part of the team. The fact that over the course of the last 12 months, we've been forced to be in this virtual space opened us to recruit from outside of the Chicagoland area. And that allowed us to be in conversation with somebody like Emily, who brought a completely different skill set. Emily did not bring this kind of classic consulting career pathway. She brought unbelievable diversity in her experiences in building and scaling communities and telling stories outside of some of the stories that we hear all day, every day in the consulting space. And because of that, she's made such a lasting impact. So it almost started with the geographical parameters have been lifted. Yeah. And then even more of a focus on bringing diverse skill sets and mentalities and attitudes allows us, it's almost like we've just got so much more to pull from, and that's extremely exciting. So huge shout out to Emily for bringing you and I together today.
Yeah, looks like Emily's on. Hey, Emily.
Absolutely. So I want to, now that we've got to know a little bit more about you, I want to dive back into the value space. So one of the responsibilities that you've had over the course of the last several years is to build and develop teams. Mm-hmm. So we love to go deep with leaders of teams in terms of how you're doing it, how you're thinking about doing it.
Sure.
And as it pertains to values, what are some of the things that you think about in terms of a newly, you're stepping into a new role, or you're stepping into a new team, or you have the responsibility to build a team from the ground up? How are you leveraging values in those very early days?
I think it's an anchor point for us, and it's something that we have started with, established, and continue to reiterate. I think that, you know, when you set the values, it's not just you set it and forget it. You're constantly working towards it. So when I think about, you know, we're looking to grow our team today, and one of the things that we're considering is like when you grow a team, then there are certain things like culture that become risky depending on how much you scale it up. But if you anchor it to the values that you have, when you're looking for someone, if that person shares your values, then it opens up all the other considerations that you have. You don't have to be thinking like, oh, does this person act a certain way in this particular environment? You're thinking, okay, you have a shared value with me. I know that, you know, you're always going to be looking for that next thing. What is the next question? You're driven as an individual. You are humble, which is critical in our environment just because we work with so many cross-functional partners. So from a hiring perspective, it's something that we're always looking for. And then the rest, if you come from a different background, that's better for us, because I would say every single person on my team thinks of things differently, have very different lived experiences, look different. And I think those are important. And then as far as, you know, continuing to practice it, I think it's easy to say like, oh, I want to be humble. But in practice, if you have, you start to figure out where the balances are between recognizing that, you know, this is what you're bringing to the table, and also, you know, realizing that this is a team effort, and the way in which you approach it with other team members, not just within your team, but within the cross-functional teams, and think of it as we are in this together. We have one shared goal. I think you have to work at it.
You know, as we bring people in with more diverse value sets, how do we exist now in a team with folks who might have, and I won't say conflicting values, but maybe differing values? And I say this particularly today because there are a few values that are showing up that are distinctly different within teams, equally as important, but distinctly different. For example, I think today we're realizing that there are folks that are strongly rooted in, you know, their families and ensuring the safety and stability of their families. And that value maybe has even risen to like number one. And there are folks within teams that, you know, maybe due to circumstances or just where they're at in life, don't have as much of a priority on or responsibility to support and maintain their family. And so maybe that's one example of, you know, how do we as leaders maintain a team where you have a little bit of that difference and that diversity?
I think it's ultimately that comes down to compassion and an open mindset that whoever is, you know, that's a life thing, where, you know, you have a family and you have different priorities in that sense. So being compassionate as a leader and as a teammate, and understanding that, you know, what I assume is great for me as a 9 to 5, it may not work for you. So can we have flexibilities there? I think in that sense, you want to constantly set expectations, constantly communicate, make sure that you guys are on the same page. And then in terms of new values that are coming in, I think because we always try to keep an open mindset, like, yes, we are anchored in the 4 values that we've defined, but that frees us up to invite other values into the fold. I think you just add more dimension to that team.
Yeah. And, you know, this gets into, you know, individual versus team values and how do we transition and kind of bridge those two. I'll add a little bit to your perspective. I think one of the things that we're learning, and again, easier said than done, it's so obvious, communication is so key. So in cases like where we're standing today, where maybe certain values are like really showing up strongly for folks, I think there are some folks that might not feel like they've got the platform or the ability to express how important something is for them, for their family. And at the same time, we've had this like almost open window into everybody's lives. So for us, I think we're realizing that the more we can enable people to express what's important to them in front of the team, in individual conversations, in coaching discussions, it's almost like this weight has been lifted. And I particularly have been in a few of these conversations over the last few weeks where like we've just gotten real very quick.
Mm-hmm.
And that really has, again, that's, exercised my ability to just, sit and listen, but allowing people to speak to their values, particularly now where these values might be evolving or like they might be growing steam, building steam, just the ability to speak to them, the ability to express them. And that allows, it allows all of us to be heard. It also allows us as leaders to more deeply empathize. But I do think that there might be in some organizations, there might be some cultural norms that suppress, that individuality, or maybe the team values are so strong.
Yeah, I think that's up to the manager, actually. So there's two things. One, something that someone said to me recently is that culture is defined by the people that you give responsibility to. And as someone who has the responsibility of building and maintaining a team culture, it's up to me to ask those questions. If you start a conversation with a question, you're essentially inviting that person to come to you. And, the comfort level of that person coming to you in a larger environment versus a one-on-one environment, that has to also be anchored in trust. They have to trust that this is a safe space. And it is up to all leaders to create that space, to also show vulnerability on our side, to say that this is what's going on with me. And I understand that I'm not the same as everyone else. So I would like for you to share because what you have to say matters.
I love it. And I couldn't agree more. And I think, we've used the term speed of trust recently, which also is a great book, a great read, and it's been for the last 10 years. But speed matters today as well, too. So we're also finding that some of these open and authentic and raw conversations are happening outside of like the standard meeting cadence and governance that we've set up. Like sometimes these conversations are just being had. And I think we've lived enough in this kind of structured Zoom to Zoom environment that some of these conversations are now are being had extemporaneously in the middle of Zoom calls or in between Zoom calls. And we'll get a cell phone call, right, from a peer or an employee, or I'll pick up the phone, and we call it the call after the call, where we're kind of busting out of this standard regiment of Zoom meetings and some of the structure that we put in place at the beginning of the pandemic to ensure that we're communicating officially. Some of this unofficial communication is happening in between the Zoom meetings, and it's incredibly valuable. So to us, that's also speed of trust and just ensuring that people can pick up the phone and make the call after the call or speak their mind if they heard something in a meeting and not have to wait until the next official one-on-one.
Yeah, I feel like, my team has always been big on Slack and GChat. So, and that seems to be a comfortable place for us to communicate that kind of in real time so that we don't have to wait for the next meeting.
Interesting.
I also think that, using things like Slack or picking up the phone and calling whoever you need to talk about something, it actually alleviates I have a one-on-one with this person that I need to give feedback to, or that I need to have a difficult conversation with. It's almost like if you thought of it, have that conversation in that moment, because otherwise it gets built up. And it becomes bigger than it needs to be.
And some of this dialogue's happening for you and your teams on Slack, which is interesting because that's more of like a written type of a medium. So, and it's also, it's recorded, it's there, and it's up for interpretation.
Yeah. We do a lot of sharing on Slack. So things that we read, things that we've seen on the internet that are impacting our lives. We tend to do that. We also, we're big on emojis and memes. And so it's kind of like we hit all of the different ways in which we can communicate.
It's incredible to see how many like informal mediums have made their way into like our day to day. Again, like 2 years ago, would we have a Slack channel that for 25 minutes straight we were communicating as a team by nothing but emojis? Probably not. Or Giphies, like probably not. But today it's like absolutely. Someone's got a birthday, somebody just celebrated something. I mean, it's just this constant thread. And I think a little bit of that informality, a little bit of that, again, blending of the personal and the professional. And I know that will stick, at least for our team. I hope it sticks for a lot of teams out there, because we've almost had to use that as a tool for humility and understanding in dark times over the course of the last couple of years. But I think that's going to be a very positive byproduct, just the personal nature and kind of raw nature that we're communicating, both the good and the bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So double clicking into values, let's talk about individual values and team values. I use this story with my team all the time, that when I started my career, it was with a Fortune 20 company. There was 10,000 employees. I was in a training class of 600 people. And this was back in the day where, you graduated college, you landed a job with a big organization. You, as quickly as you possibly could, drank the Kool-Aid, and you subscribed to the values that were painted on the wall. And there was very little work done in between you signing an offer letter and you enrolling in the values that were on the wall, because those were now your values, right? Things are a lot different today. And individual values have not only made their way into the discussion, but it's almost a prerequisite. So talk to us a little bit about, as you develop teams and you build your teams, how are you leveraging both individual and team values, and how do they fit? Like, how do they connect?
Sure. So something that I like to do anytime we bring in a new group, or we have a reorg of some sort, is reset. And as part of that reset conversation, I ask the team to bring in their motivation. What are you motivated by, both from a professional standpoint and from a personal? And what that allows us to do is, one, you're recognizing that everyone is motivated differently. So yes, we are going into this assuming good intent in others, but the way in which you react, we're not mind readers. So part of that is communicating like, this is what I care about, this is what I'm motivated by. So let's say you have someone who, for some reason, seems to be a little bit competitive with you. And you find out that one of the things that that person is motivated by is, that's something that fuels them. If they've gotten a no in some way, shape, or form, they use that as motivation to work harder, which means that it brings out the competitive side in you. And I think that understanding that for every single person on the team, one, teaches you that you're different. Two, also helps put into practice the assume good intent idea. And then three, it helps you understand the person as a person, not just someone who's going to work with you. And I think in the long run, it just makes the team stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like assume good intent, from our perspective, is almost like an operating norm. It's like a shared agreement that everybody has, and that potentially, unlocks the ability for people to show up a little bit more authentically and for their personal values to shine.
But I do think that, so something that has shifted for me throughout the last 15 months or so is it's assume good intent, but it's also make sure that you're considering the impact of your actions on others. It's both things, because you have to assume that other people aren't assuming good intent or don't know what your intentions are. So it's two sides to the coin.
Okay. And as you do this, the work with individual values, how do you then bring in team values? Like how do you create that bridge? Are there exercises that you do, or are there discussions that you have where folks can essentially take their individual values and calibrate them or bring them into the team values or the corporate values that you all hold?
So the motivation piece is one. The second piece is, so I have a weekly with my team, and oftentimes we'll come into it with, here is the theme for the week. It can be work related. As of late, it has been more around, what do you care about? How are you reacting to this thing that has happened in the world? Because that's, in those conversations, you get a view in it. So it's a little less formal than what you're talking about. But in those conversations, you get a view into, okay, what do they care about? And let's say it's something that maybe they personally weren't impacted by, but it makes them think like, oh, right, I should be considering that. I should be thinking in that way, or I've never thought of it that way. And that's an interesting perspective that, I can now consider. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I think there's a couple of things that I'm hearing in there. I mean, for us, we do a lot of work in the value space, and for the first time, we are truly identifying the space that exists between personal values and team values, and acknowledging it and honoring it. One of our interns earlier this year, big shout out to Ava Pomerantz, wrote an incredible article called the liminal space. She called the space between individual and team values the liminal space, which is a space that is a bit undefined, but there's a bit of a threshold. And it's not saying people are transforming, into those values of their organization or taking on the identity of their organization, but it's okay to have that space there. It's okay to have certain values that are extremely strong, in your world, in your personal life, but that maybe aren't at the top of the list for the organization. And there's a lot then that you can do, to your point, to support those values in individuals. And you can do that in the ground game, in the one-on-one discussions. You can also do that as a team. We meet on a regular basis as a team, and we share individual values, and simply sharing those and allowing people to tell the story behind each of those values allows us to connect, not just with like, here are my top 3 values, but more so specific stories that support why it's so important for me. And oftentimes that allows us to support each other in the day-to-day. So we love that. We call it the liminal space, the undefined space.
Yeah, I like that.
There's real space there. So I'll link the article in the show notes.
Great.
To round out values, please.
No, one other thing that I was going to mention, and I found it helpful for me, and it's something that I've had each member of my team start to consider, is when you move from doing the actual work to being more of a people manager, I think it shifts your mindset and those values as well. And, the bigger the team gets, because everyone is individual and everyone has different skill sets and different values, understanding and being self-aware of who you are as a manager, I think, is one of those more formalized exercises that I think will help maintain that bridge as well. So it's very much in a chart format, but it's like, here are the strengths that you have that will carry you through always. Here are the weaknesses that you have. Here are the traits that you think you can improve on, or here are the traits that will never change because it's part of who you are. So being able to put that pen to paper also helps you express that to the other people on your team, people who will eventually report into you, or people who you will manage.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of really good practical advice. Leading day to day is something that we talk about, and the ability to be able to recognize who you are as a leader and put it into practical application on a day-to-day basis is super important. I want to maybe shift to the last focus area for today. And this is really around, as we talk about building culture, we talk about bringing values in. Let's talk about the transition that, we as teams and organizations are making today and over the course of the next, 3, 6, 12 months, whatever it might be. And you and I before the show, I was kind of joking about how like we as a team haven't even named it yet. It's not back to work. It's not re-entry or reintegration. It's not the new hybrid model. I mean, and of course we're so quick to try to coin it, but there is real shift happening. There's real transition happening. And for you and your teams, what are maybe the one or two things that you're keeping at the forefront of your discussions, or even just the way that you approach your teams as we move to more of a mixed model and people are starting to, come to the office, or maybe they are making sure that again their parameters are met and their families are taken care of. How do we coexist in this new world?
Yeah. I think that's a question that everyone is asking, and most people don't have an answer for. And I think something that I mentioned to you the other day is the going from always being in the office 5 days a week to nobody's in the office at all and you're working from home 5 days a week. That is so much easier because it's black and white. And so everyone is on the same page. We're playing by the same rules. As you move into this model where a lot of companies, because they realize, one, work from home is possible, two, and it doesn't impact productivity. Two, we're starting to also reduce footprint within like physical footprint of the office spaces that we're in. It's really thinking through, how do we make the time where we are in the office valuable, as well as giving that flexibility of, when you decide to come in. And I'm not going to pretend that I have the answers. I do not. But one of the things that I've started to do is just ask my team questions. If you had a preference or if you had a choice, what would you want to do? How would you want to use your time as we're in the office? What are the days that you would prefer? What do you like? What is your perspective when it comes to a hybrid work model? Why is it that you want a hybrid work model rather than an in-person? Some people on my team prefer to be in the office. And some people would prefer to not be in the office at all. I personally, if I'm going to be in the office, I would prefer not to be on video. I think that there is something that I've really missed about being in person that gets lost in video, and those are genuine interactions where I'm not behind a screen, where I'm not, Zoom fatigue, being on video all the time is also very, very draining for me personally. So being able to mix that up and, wanting to make sure that it's no screen time when we're in the office. We're working together, we're in as a team around the same time, is really what I would like in an ideal world. I think in practice, it's much harder because you do have to consider, okay, well, some people aren't going to be able to come in on those days that you want. We're not always going to have that, here are the days that you come in all the time. So can we be flexible in that, and how does that happen?
Yeah, you've got me thinking too about some of the discussion we're having around, how distinct do we get with plans and policy, and how open are we to just, experiencing our team as people continue to have choice, and some choose to come back to the office, some choose to stay home. And I think we're realizing very quickly that being able to experience us coming back together, working virtually, the hybrid is allowing us to make better decision making. To your point, and I think it's such a good one, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had no choice. We had to write a policy, and that policy was everybody's got to get home. We've got to get behind a Zoom screen, and we've got to figure this out. So the continuity planning maybe was a little bit more black and white than the re-entry planning. And we're experiencing just some really, really unique things about this new hybrid model. For example, over the last couple of weeks, we've had the opportunity for a handful of us to come together in our offices here at WeWork in Chicago. and we don't have a ton of space. So we've been very thoughtful about, making sure that we've got distance and making sure that, we've got a clean environment and all of the resources that people need to feel safe. But at the end of the day, it was one of the first times that a handful of us were, together in a day, right, in an office. And it was almost as if we had to retrain ourselves on how to coexist physically without the restrictor of and the restrictions of a Zoom screen.
Yeah.
And so even just physically being in the same space and experiencing like the heightening of the volume of people's voices and a bit of the talking over that never happens on Zoom because communication is so partitioned on Zoom and it's so gated, was just so, it was like we had to relearn how to be humans. And you can't write a plan for that, right? So in fact, we realized that after a couple of days together, like it took 2x the energy, I think, for all of us to physically be in the same space. So we're learning that people need a little bit of time to, come in and have those interactions and then also go back home and process and unwind a little bit.
That's a good point. So, I hadn't considered that.
Yeah, you'll experience it, I'm sure, in your first, live team meeting or offsite, but it's something different. It really is.
Yeah.
The other thing too that I'll the other kind of anecdote as well. I think it was that same week where we had more people here at the office than we did at home. In fact, there was a meeting, a particular Zoom meeting, and I love the point that you called out about how I prefer not to be on video when I'm in the office. I think our orientation is to make sure that everything's on Zoom these days, whether it's a fully virtual meeting or whether we're live and we're Zooming out. And there was a meeting where by default, that was just our mentality that, of course, if there's a meeting, there's a Zoom open. And we were 10 minutes into a Zoom and we realized that 9 out of the 10 people on this call were physically in person in a room, all behind our individual laptop screens. And it was just this weird realization that we just all defaulted to, we have a meeting, so I'm staring at a screen. And we all kind of collectively lifted our faces and said, we're here, like we're all here face to face. So I like some of even your thinking about ensuring that there is that the face to face is maximized and that it's authentic time, and that maybe it's not every day of the week, but the times that we are together, the camera's off and we're doing some real collaboration work.
I feel like I feel as though, so I was in one meeting where I was maybe one of 5 people who were on a screen. And then there were actually people who were congregating in the office space. And I also think that, when you have that mix between people who are on video and people who are in person, all of our office rooms have a camera up top to invite people in over screen share. I actually found it very difficult to focus when conversations were happening in person. And I think that's what you lose when you are going into a mixed model, where because you're in person, you naturally just want to converse with the person in front of you. And then you almost forget about the people that are on the screen because they're not physically in front of you anymore. I think when we do get into that whole, it's going to be mixed, it's also making sure that everyone has an equal voice and an equal playing field. I think that will be a challenge.
Yeah. And the only way we can solve for this is by moving through it together, right? And I think even just keeping these open dialogues, keeping a focus on our individual and team values, making sure that some of those commitments that we've made to each other, and I love, the assume good intent, they're even more prevalent today. Now that we're trying to solve for things like, we need to relearn how to be humans again. I mean, these are bigger issues than, how do we hit our quota in the first quarter? We got a question, and it's actually from somebody on our team who's just super interested in getting to know a little bit more about you, Valentina. But I think I love this question because I think it allows us to get a little bit more practical. And the question is, we'd love to know what's a top value or 2 for you, and how would you explain that to your team?
Yeah. So I'll say from the onset, our team has 4 values: humility, curiosity, transparency, and trust. Something that I mentioned earlier is that piece around assume good intent in others, but realize the impact of your own actions and the words that you say. There's a speech that it's a commencement speech by a writer that I lean back on actually quite often when I feel stuck. And it's called This is Water. There's an animated version of it somebody put together. And the concept of it is around that theme of let's, as an adult, when you're, going through school, your values and the way that you see the world is different. But as an adult, you can very quickly fall into patterns of something that becomes banal. It becomes boring. It's the same thing every day. You clock in, you clock out, you have to run errands. And throughout that time, you can become tired. And when you do find the energy to, and you find yourself in a space where you're annoyed for one reason or another, or you're frustrated and something in the world isn't going your way, if you have the bandwidth to try to think, apologies, because my dog's in the background.
No worries.
If you have the space, try to consider that the person who may be annoying you because you don't know them and you're just not in, you just want to get home and that's where your priorities are, try to think of it as, well, maybe they have something else going on that I don't know about, that I don't have visibility into. Can we have compassion for the other people around us to consider that the world doesn't center around us. And it's actually better if we consider and ask, how are things going? Or if it's a stranger, just assume that, that person may be going through something difficult, and then you also approach things differently. Then there is more meaning to those actions that seem everyday and kind of boring. I don't know. I lost train of thought actually with the
That's
question.
Okay. I love it. I was completely engulfed in your explanation, and I was also visualizing it as in animated form. So tell us again the author and the name of the piece again, so that people can look it up.
So I can send it as a link. This is Water, and it was by David Foster Wallace.
Amazing. That's cool. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome. I'm definitely going to take a look at that. I want to just round things out and first thank you, Valentina, for the discussion today. I knew that there was so much to unpack with you, but I also wanted to make sure that it was a really good balance of theory and philosophy and also practical application. That's what we're all about here, both the clouds and the dirt. And I think you've really been able to show up today, not just as a thought leader in this space, but somebody who lives and breathes it and puts it into a practice every day. And we want to thank you for that. And we want to thank you for your perspective today.
Yeah, I was really, this was a really engaging conversation. I'm walking away with things that I hadn't considered before. So thank you also. And thank you to Emily for making the introduction and pushing me to do this, because otherwise I probably would not have. And yeah, this was great. And hopefully we can continue to have these conversations moving forward.
We absolutely will. And in the spirit of continuing the conversation, we're going to share a new series that we're spinning up really through July, and it starts July 1st next week. And we're going to be going even deeper into this topic of culture and how culture is taking shape, particularly now as folks redefine work and redefine their careers. And at the top of each month, we're going to bring somebody in from Thoughtteam to really tee up and present a big topic in the culture space. And we're going to support it then with great leaders like Valentina, who have a lot to say, particularly in the culture space. And so next week, episode 48, we have one of our own, Anjana Raj, who will be joining us to tee up the topic of navigating workplace culture in a post-pandemic world. So much to unpack, so much discussion to be had, and we are so thrilled that we have the platform to share your story and to tell ours. We invite everybody to tune in every Thursday at 3:00. You can register to join these discussions at thoughteam.com/live. or you can find us in your YouTube or LinkedIn feed. For those who have joined today, both teammates, family, friends, and our extended community, thank you so much, Valentina. Again, thank you. Welcome to the community. And we hope that everybody has a wonderful rest of the day. We'll see you next week.